Good evening, you're watching London Live News at 6 with Helena Warrior. Coming up tonight, a South London man has been jailed for life for killing his grandfather in the first televised sentencing at the Old Bailey, 9 years after cameras in Crown Courts were first promised. The trial continues for one former and two serving Metropolitan Police officers as they are charged with sending grossly offensive messages in a WhatsApp group with Wayne Couzens, the man who murdered Sarah Everard last year. We'll have an update on London's weather in the next 10 minutes, plus thinking beyond the supermarket shelf. We'll hear from Fairtrade about how the cost of living crisis is hitting farmers growing the very food we consume and what we can do to help. And you can leave your mark on a blank canvas. A new interactive installation by Japanese artist Yayoi Kusama comes to the Tate Modern, and we'll find out the meaning behind it. First tonight, though, a man has been jailed for life for killing his grandfather in the first televised sentencing at the Old Bailey. 25-year-old Ben Oliver from South London was handed a minimum term of 10 years and 8 months for manslaughter after stabbing his 74-year-old grandfather David Oliver in Mottingham in January last year. Well, the court was told Oliver's autistic spectrum disorder, combined with other emotional and mental factors, diminished his responsibility for the killing.
Ben Oliver, you are here today to be sentenced for the unlawful killing of your 74-year-old grandfather, David Oliver. You were 23 when you carried out the killing and are now aged 25. Would you stand up, please? The sentence I pass upon you is therefore one of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 10 years and 8 months. From that term will be deducted the term you have spent on remand, which is 553 days. That deduction results in a term of 9 years and 63 days. Those numbers can be amended administratively if my calculation is incorrect. Once you have served that term, you will be entitled to apply for parole. However, you will not be released by the parole board unless they conclude that you no longer pose a risk to the public. If you are released, you will remain on licence for the rest of your life. I impose the appropriate surcharge. That concludes these sentencing remarks.
Well, the arrival of TV cameras at Crown Courts comes 9 years after the move was first promised, allowing broadcasters to film judges sentencing serious criminals. Well, Justice Secretary Dominic Raab said the move will improve transparency and reinforce confidence in the justice system. Now, one former and two serving Metropolitan Police officers have been charged with sending grossly offensive messages in a WhatsApp group with Wayne Couzens, the ex-police officer who murdered Sarah Everard in March last year. The court heard today how the group included grossly racist, sexist and misogynistic messages discussing rape, domestic abuse and violence against women. Well, PC William Neville described pinning a 15-year-old girl to the floor during an arrest, and former officer Joel Borders suggested he would rape and beat a named female police officer. PC Jonathan Cobban also spoke about racially diverse areas of London in a derogatory manner. Well, all three men have denied the charges and their trial continues at Westminster Magistrates Court. Now, a man has been jailed for more than 3 decades after carrying out 3 unprovoked knife attacks in northwest London. Amin Lauer was convicted of the murder of 48-year-old Leon Street, who was stabbed from behind in Neasden Lane North in Brent on January 11th last year. A 32-year-old man who fortunately survived his injuries was also stabbed on the same road that evening. 6 days later, a 47-year-old man was stabbed in the same location, narrowly surviving his injuries. Well, overwhelming DNA evidence and CCTV led to a life sentence with a minimum term of 38 years. Now, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has said he sacked former Shadow Minister Sam Tarry for making up a policy on the hoof after Tarry gave broadcast interviews from a picket line yesterday that were unauthorised by party headquarters. Well, speaking during a visit to Birmingham today, Mr Starmer said Labour would always be on the side of working people after he struggled to contain a row within the unions and the left wing of his party over the move.
I think in any organisation, certainly any political party, everybody understands that if you're on the front bench, you can't book yourself onto media programmes without permission, and you can't make up policy on the hoof. I think that's very straightforward in political parties. I think that's pretty straightforward for any organisation or any business. And so we've got collective responsibility, and that's what that's about. Obviously, the Labour Party's relationship with the trade unions is historic. They're part of our movement. They always have been, always will be. And that's why we've worked with them on things like employment rights for day one, the most comprehensive set of rights that we set out at our conference last year. So this is about collective responsibility. I think everybody understands that.
Well, it is understood the policy Mr Tarry was considered to have fabricated was when he told Sky News every worker should get a pay rise in line with inflation. Well, Sir Keir was also asked if shadow ministers would be allowed to join picket lines in upcoming strikes if they did not make any unauthorised media appearances. Well, this is what he said.
We take each case as it comes. I want to see these issues resolved, and my criticism is really of the government because it's inevitable, I think, when you've got a cost of living crisis, that so many working people are concerned about their wages. I understand that, I understand the concerns. The role of government is to do something in relation to the cost of living crisis. It's why we were saying a windfall tax on oil and gas companies that made more money than expected, use that to help people pay their bills, but also get people around the table to resolve these issues. The Welsh Labour government got the key players around the table and resolved the issues, and there aren't strikes there. That's the role of a responsible government.
There you go, that was Sir Keir there. Well, Labour has not officially supported the industrial action, but has accused the government of inaction and urged ministers to get involved in negotiations. Well, sticking with travel, this weekend marks the first time London's night tube service will be fully restored since the start of the coronavirus pandemic. Transport for London said the Piccadilly line will resume running through the night on Fridays and Saturdays, completing the night tube network. All-night weekend services were suspended in March 2020 due to the lockdown and COVID crisis. They first returned to the Central and Victoria lines in November 2021, followed by the Jubilee line in May and the Northern line earlier this month. Now, HBO has released the official trailer for its upcoming documentary about Diana, Princess of Wales. The film, titled The Princess, comes shortly before the 25th anniversary of her death in 1997. It will explore Diana's complex relationship with the media and her romance with the Duke of Wales, including their marriage through to their infamous split in 1992. Well, the film will also show how the paparazzi frenzy contributed to Diana's death at the age of just 36. Well, that will be released on August the 13th. Now let's take a look at London's weather for you now. It's going to be a dry and cloudy evening tonight with temperatures of around 15 degrees overnight. A lovely and sunny morning ahead, taking us into Friday, where temperatures are looking to reach 27 degrees. Looking ahead to the weekend, on Saturday and Sunday, we should expect a little more cloud cover, but it's staying hot with temperatures around 26 degrees. Well, just before the break, let's bring you this. ZSL London Zoo has unveiled its landmark new Monkey Valley walkthrough exhibit this morning, where Londoners can see eastern black and white colobus monkeys with 360 views. Well, let's see what the zoo has said.
We're here at Monkey Valley, the brand new home to our eastern black and white colobus monkeys. The best thing about this is it's a walkthrough exhibit for our visitors to be able to do what we really want, which is to reconnect with nature here in the centre of London. When you walk through this incredible walkthrough exhibit, you'll be able to see the animals jumping from tree to tree, their magnificent long tails gliding as they do so. A really natural, immersive exhibit, and it's going to be incredibly exciting for the visitors, but also the monkeys, who are no doubt going to love watching the visitors that have come to see them in their new home. The colobus monkeys here at London Zoo are part of a really critical, collaborative, global breeding program, and the reason that's so important is it helps to ensure a long-term, safe, sustainable population of these monkeys. So many threats to these monkeys as there are to so many other species, and deforestation, for example, is something that's meaning that their natural habitats are becoming under greater threat. So it's really important that we keep these pools, these populations of monkeys around the whole world, and one being right here in the middle of London at London Zoo. So one really interesting evolutionary fact about colobus monkeys is they don't actually have thumbs like us. They do have a very, very tiny one, but they'll use their fingers like this to navigate through the canopy of trees, use their very long tail to counterbalance themselves. But if you get a chance, as you will here, to see them really up close, definitely look out for that slightly missing thumb, because it's a really interesting thing about colobus monkeys.
There we go, that was Dan Simmons from ZSL there, and that exhibit opens today. Right, it's time for a break now, but when we come back, Matt Withers will be here to give us a roundup of London's local papers, including a possible hint that London could host the Olympics again. See you soon.
From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live.
Welcome back to London Live News. Time now for a look at what stories have been making headlines in the capital's local papers. Well, joining us now is Matt Withers. Matt, thank you so much for being here. Let's start with this. It's, of course, the 10th anniversary of the Olympics in London. And this story says that we could see it back in London, potentially.
Yeah, potentially. Certainly it's what the Mayor is saying. This is from the South London Press. It's Sadiq Khan talking about having the Olympics back in London as early as 2036. He said that discussions over a potential bid to host the Games again were underway, although he stressed they were at an early stage. 2036 was the first opportunity, really. Well, definitely, actually, because Paris has got the next one in 2024. Then it's Los Angeles in 2028 and probably Brisbane in 2032. And the point he makes is that future Games need to be green, with the consequence of climate change being seen in recent weeks. And actually, London, you wouldn't have to build anything. Everything's there. The transport's there. The stadia are still there from the last time. We've kept them on. They're being used. It's not like other cities such as Rio, where they built all these amenities and they're not being used at all at the moment. So it does make sense that London could host the Olympics again quite soon. Politically, after those three cities, if it could be held in the West again for a fourth successive time, I'm not quite sure.
Absolutely. So it's more of a it's less of a confirmation, more of a something that we would like to see here in London, because it was such a fantastic time.
It was. I think it's what's known in journalism as a bit of a flyer, because obviously Sadiq Khan is not going to be the Mayor of London. He's highly unlikely to be the Mayor of London by 2036, so he's probably not going to be one to deliver on this. So it's something that I think people would like to see, but very early days.
Absolutely. Right, well, let's move on to this now. Now, this is quite a sad story from the Romford Recorder.
Yeah, this is very sad, actually. This is mystery over woman's death after skeletal remains found in Romford. And this is a coroner who has recorded an open verdict in the death of a woman because, very sadly, her body was so decomposed it was impossible to determine her cause of death. This is Janet Mary Ashley, who was 55 and was found at her home in Hailsham at the start of this year in January. It looks like she may have laid undiscovered for months. Her family, who didn't attend the court hearing, did tell the coroner's service that they'd not been in contact with her for 12 years, that neighbours hadn't seen her for months. They think it was October 2021 when she was last seen. They said that she doesn't go out much and keep herself to herself. Now, coroner's courts aren't just there to determine the cause of death. One of the very basic things they have to do is determine who it was that died, and the body was in such a state here that they were only able to identify her on the grounds that she was a sole registered occupant of the property, and so they basically had to assume that that's who it was. So a very sad story indeed.
Yeah, it's quite a shocking story there. So the coroner had an open verdict, but there's no foul play as such.
Absolutely not. There's no suggestion of that. They simply can't say how she died because the body had been there for so long that they couldn't perform the medical tests that they would ordinarily do, so they've had to record an open verdict. It seems that it would be forever a mystery as to how she died.
Absolutely. Right, well, let's move on to our third story, and this one is quite an interesting story. A local community is kind of fighting back against what they say is an unfair health rating.
Yeah, this is from the My London website, and this is about West Green Road in the Tottenham area. It's been named London's unhealthiest high street based on a Royal Society of Public Health ranking of the 146 streets that are seen as high streets in the capital. They said that the average life expectancy for people living in Muswell Hill, the area with the healthiest ranked high street, is approximately 4.5 years longer than for those in Tottenham Green, where West Green Road is located. And they also award points for things like leisure centres, health services, and they knock off points for the amount of payday lenders, fast food outlets. But a lot of people locally are very unhappy about this, and they've been speaking to My London, saying that it doesn't make any sense. There's somebody here called Ali Riaz. He said, "I don't understand why West Green Road has been given this label. It's a lovely road full of lovely people. We have so many different cultures, Black, Caribbean, Somali and Pakistani like me, with cuisines to cater for everyone, and people make me smile. So I would say that is pretty healthy." And throughout this article, there's a lot of people quoted, and nobody seems to be actually quibbling with the data, more how they would interpret being healthy. And it seems that these people are very happy with the local area, ergo they consider it healthy.
I mean, I suppose they're saying that health is rather subjective, which I suppose it is, but I guess it's more the stigma that they don't want attached to their high street. What have they done to fight back, really?
Well, one person, Erin Kaplan, has felt so strongly about it, describing it as arbitrary, that he's made a short documentary that he has put online, because he wants, when people Google the street, they don't come across this data showing it's unhealthy, but they see that it's a strong community. Somebody else here who's actually in that documentary, Nick Daly, he said, "I can't understand who would come out with the statement that West Green Road is unhealthy. It gives us a stigma. It's a happy, vibrant community." So it comes down to an argument of the statistics that do tend to show that people die there quite earlier than other places, and people who say, well, we're happy.
Well, each their own, as they say.
Quite.
Right, finally, let's have a look at this. We've heard a lot about climate activists in the past couple of years, really, but they seem to have struck in North London.
Yeah, this is an area which I suppose probably would tend to come out quite high on the health rankings, but they have their own issues. This is Hammond High. They say Highgate and Crouch End targeted by tyre extinguishers. And it's true, these are owners of SUVs in these areas that are waking up to find that their car tyres have been deflated. Tyre extinguishers say that they, quote, disarmed 65 gas-guzzling SUVs, that's their wording, in the affluent Crouch End area of London overnight earlier this month. They struck again. They've done this before. They've basically just gone around these streets, found the SUVs and let the air out of their tyres. One person who contacted the Hammond High found a note on their windscreen saying, "Attention, your gas guzzler kills. We have deflated one or more of your tyres. You'll be angry, but don't take it personally. It's not you, it's your car." And this has been happening quite frequently.
Well, at least they left a note,
Well,
eh?
quite, yes.
So have this group of tyre extinguishers, have they struck elsewhere in the capital?
Over there is Camden and Hampstead, as well as other locations across the UK, Europe and America. The Met have advised people affected to report it online. A spokesperson said, "We ask that reports are made through the Met's website, and we will assess these to establish whether offences have been committed," which I think is a long-winded way of saying we're not going to do anything about this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Matt Withers. There we go. That was Matt Withers with a roundup of London's local papers. Now, the cost of living is having a big impact on us here in the capital, but new research shows that many of us don't consider the impact the crisis has on farmers in the countries who grow the food we buy in UK supermarkets. Well, the research also shows that 50% of Londoners associate ethical products with expensive ones, but this may not be the case. Well, earlier I spoke to Anna Barker from the Fair Trade Foundation, who told us more.
So it's a really challenging time for all farmers at the moment, but as Fair Trade, we're obviously hearing it directly from the ones that work with us. It was already a really difficult few years for them. Climate change has been sort of changing the weather patterns for them, so that's made it longer dry seasons or unpredicted rain, and so that's made it really, really hard for them to produce the same quantity and quality of their crop. Then they were hit by COVID-19, and for many farmers and workers, that really changed the markets that they sold to. So when it initially hit the UK, for example, and you might remember when there was a shortage of loo roll in the shops, people were prioritising essential goods and stopped buying things like flowers, for example. So suddenly for the flower farms, they had no one to sell to. And now they're being hit by the cost of living too. So the Ukrainian war has pushed the cost of fuel and fertilizer up, and this is having a massive impact for farmers and workers on top of the other challenges. So to kind of bring that to life, in Kenya, they're forecasting a 10% drop in coffee production just from the increase of cost of fertilizer alone, let alone all these other factors going in. So inflation running at 27% in Ghana, the cost of bread almost unaffordable in Malawi now. So really, really challenging time for farmers to make ends meet.
And I suppose one of the most challenging things is that we're not really taught to look beyond what's on the shelf, are we? So we don't particularly have an understanding of what's going on. I wonder, for the farmers that you're talking about, are things set to get any better, or are they going to get worse before they get better?
I mean, I think our concern at Fair Trade is there's a real chance that things could get worse here. If UK shoppers don't think about who's behind the products and, you know, who's supplying those ingredients that we're used to having here, then many of those farmers simply won't be able to afford to stay in business. and they will have to move elsewhere. The average cocoa farmer is now over 50. There's no incentive in an industry where most people earn less than $1 a day for young people to stay and do all that hard work associated with cocoa. So if in the UK we start paying less for our products, or we don't start paying more to reflect inflation, then there is a real risk that there just simply won't be cocoa farmers there anymore, creating supply shortages, creating higher prices. So it's a bit of a vicious circle if we're not able to support farmers through this time.
I suppose if what we can do as a consumer is buy ethical products, is it possible to do that on a budget? Because I imagine that's everyone's concern with the cost of living crisis here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do really acknowledge the cost of living crisis here. We know it's really difficult, but you can choose fair trade at an affordable price point. So it can be a really small switch. So it could be just your bananas. You just pick fair trade when you pick your bananas. And for some shops, they only stock and sell fair trade bananas. So they've made that choice really, really easy for you. And it could be where you go. So if you wanted to go to Lidl or Aldi, they've got loads of fair trade products for you there. And Lidl have actually made a commitment on 100% of their block chocolate being fair trade. If you're out and about and you're buying a coffee, you could go to Greggs. 100% of their coffee is fair trade. So there is a fair trade option for most people at the price point they're at. And we do encourage you just to make those small switches where you can, because it has a really, really big difference for farmers.
Well, you mentioned Greggs and Lidl there. I feel like those are two places where people wouldn't necessarily assume that you were getting the most ethical products, because we often conflate that with expensive products.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, we've done research that shows maybe a third of the UK don't realise that you can buy ethical products that aren't really expensive. And that's why we're really trying to get this messaging out there. But yeah, there's fair trade products for all price points. So yeah, Lidl and Greggs, we've got new products coming through with Asda. We've just launched some lines with Amazon. So there really are fair trade products, whatever your budget is, and it doesn't need to cost a lot more. We kind of work on this kind of global system where everyone pays in, and that creates the difference together. And you as a shopper really do feed into that when you buy a single product as fair trade, because then at scale we're able to help all of these farmers and workers. So it's really impactful.
Wonderful. Well, finally, Anna, just tell us where we can go for more information.
So if you go onto our website, fairtrade.org.uk, we've got loads more there. We've got lots of stories of the farmers and workers and what they're going through and how the cost of living crisis looks for them. And also on our social channels as well, you can find us really getting some of this messaging out there, and you can see where to buy fair trade products really easily.
There we are, Anna Barker from the Fair Trade Foundation. You're watching London Live News with Helena Warrior. A reminder of our top story coming up after the break. Plus, more on the cost of living, as it's revealed nearly half of parents admit they can't afford to buy new school uniforms. We'll hear more from the child poverty charity Bartle UK.
From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live.
Hello there, welcome back to London Live News. A reminder of some of the stories affecting Londoners today. A man has been jailed for life for killing his grandfather in the first televised sentencing at the Old Bailey. 25-year-old Ben Oliver from South London was handed a minimum term of 10 years and 8 months for manslaughter after stabbing his 74-year-old grandfather David Oliver in Mottingham in January last year. Well, the court was told Oliver's autistic spectrum disorder, combined with other emotional and mental factors, diminished his responsibility for the killing.
Ben Oliver, you are here today to be sentenced for the unlawful killing of your 74-year-old grandfather, David Oliver. You were 23 when you carried out the killing and are now aged 25. Would you stand up, please? The sentence I pass upon you is therefore one of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 10 years and 8 months. From that term will be deducted the term you have spent on remand, which is 553 days. That deduction results in a term of 9 years and 63 days. Those numbers can be amended administratively if my calculation is incorrect. Once you have served that term, you will be entitled to apply for parole. However, you will not be released by the parole board unless they conclude that you no longer pose a risk to the public. If you are released, you will remain on licence for the rest of your life. I impose the appropriate surcharge. That concludes these sentencing remarks.
Well, the arrival of TV cameras at Crown Courts comes 9 years after the move was first promised, allowing broadcasters to film judges sentencing serious criminals. Well, Justice Secretary Dominic Raab said the move will improve transparency and reinforce confidence in the justice system. Now, one former and 2 serving Metropolitan Police officers have been charged with sending grossly offensive messages in a WhatsApp group with Wayne Couzens, the ex-police officer who murdered Sarah Everard in March last year. The court heard today how the group included grossly racist, sexist and misogynistic messages discussing rape, domestic abuse and violence against women. Well, PC William Neville described pinning a 15-year-old girl to the floor during an arrest, and former officer Joel Borders suggested he would rape and beat a named female police officer. PC Jonathan Cobban also spoke about racially diverse areas of London in a derogatory manner. Well, all 3 men have denied the charges and their trial continues at Westminster Magistrates Court. Now, a man has been jailed for more than 3 decades after carrying out 3 unprovoked knife attacks in northwest London. Amin Lauer was convicted of the murder of 48-year-old Leon Street, who was stabbed from behind in Neasden Lane North in Brent on January 11th last year. A 32-year-old man who fortunately survived his injuries was also stabbed on the same road that evening. 6 days later, a 47-year-old man was stabbed in the same location, narrowly surviving his injuries. Well, overwhelming DNA evidence and CCTV led to a life sentence with a minimum term of 38 years. Now, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has said he sacked former Shadow Minister Sam Tarry for making up a policy on the hoof after Tarry gave broadcast interviews from a picket line yesterday that were unauthorised by party headquarters. Well, speaking during a visit to Birmingham today, Mr Starmer said Labour would always be on the side of working people after he struggled to contain a row within the unions and the left wing of his party over the move.
Everybody understands that if you're on the front bench, you can't book yourself onto media programmes without permission, and you can't make up policy on the hoof. I think that's very straightforward. Obviously, the Labour Party's relationship with the trade unions is historic. They're part of our movement. They always have been, always will be. And that's why we've worked with them on things like employment rights for day one, the most comprehensive set of rights that we set out at our conference last year. So this is about collective responsibility. I think everybody understands that.
Now, new research from the child poverty charity Buttle UK has found that as the back-to-school planning begins, nearly half of parents admit they can't afford to buy new school uniforms for their child. Well, this raises worries about bullying, with data showing some parents are taking drastic steps to be able to afford the back-to-school essentials. Well, Hebe spoke to the CEO of Buttle UK, Joseph Howes, about the figures.
At a time where many parents are thinking about going on holiday with their children, the activities that they're going to do this summer. This research has come out from Buttle and Asda, highlighting that many parents at this time are also having to think about the cost of a school uniform, and the challenges for them are that they're having to think, right, well, I'm going to have to cut back on our energy use, our costs for food, clothing for themselves, just so that they can afford at the end of this summer break to pay for their school uniforms for their children.
We've obviously seen families recently being really, really affected because of the cost of living crisis. But was this an issue prior to that as well? And were the numbers just lower?
Well, prior to the cost of living crisis, this has been an issue. Actually, last year, the government released a kind of an act on school uniform, which had statutory guidance highlighting that schools, first of all, they had to have a second-hand uniform kind of arrangement in the school, but also for any of their suppliers, they had to reduce the costs. They had to kind of think about value for this as well. So that's come in, but that's come in to help out in this cost of living crisis as well, essentially. But because everything else has gone up so much as well, because of the cost generally within summer, this is a really, really tough time. And so when you think about what we've worked out is the cost of a uniform for one child is about £175. If you've got multiple children in your family, that quickly stacks up. And actually, that's for unbranded uniform as well. So branded, there's been costs from the Children's Society that could get up to £350 for one child.
So tell me a bit about what you guys as a charity are calling for now.
Well, we've partnered up with Asda to be able to provide, Asda are providing us with £125,000 in gift cards so that the vulnerable families, and Buttle works with the most vulnerable families all across the UK, all in London as well. And we're providing the school uniforms, but as part of our grants, we provide much more than that as well. So we'll provide the kinds of items that many of us, we would pay for our children in a heartbeat. But we just, some people just don't have the money. So it might be a bed, it might be carpet for their bedroom, might be after school activities if they're in a new area and trying to fit in. But we know that with school uniforms, if you're not wearing the right stuff in school, you can get bullied, you can get left out of groups, but also you can get detentions, you can get sent home from school as well.
I mean, it's such a horrible, horrible thought, the idea of a child feeling uncomfortable, in the playground or in a classroom because their school uniform doesn't quite fit in. You guys found that there were really high numbers of children feeling anxious about this as well, didn't you?
Yeah, and there's been research on this too, where the Children's Society have, through their report as well, have worked out that it might be up to 1.8 million children all across the UK that are suffering in this way. When I linked that back to what happens in schools as well, they'd also found that about 500,000 children had been sent home because they're not wearing the right uniform, which seems even more tragic. And if the cost of living crisis increases that's really tough for children that are struggling, that are vulnerable, and that have quite difficult and challenging home environments.
Your study also found that parents are really, really anxious about it as well, adding to the list of things that they're not going to be able to get paid for this winter.
Yeah, our study, when you look at one of the statistics, it's 91% in London of parents are worried about the cost of school uniforms that are coming their way within the next few weeks and how they're going to afford to pay for it. So, I mean, that's a pretty staggering figure that 9 in 10 Londoners, that are parents, are really worried about this.
You guys as a charity, are you calling as well for volunteers and donations to help with the flow of money, trying to get these school uniforms to children that really, really need it ahead of September?
Yeah, we believe that everyone needs to play their part in this cost of living crisis. The government have set new guidelines and pushing schools for effectively cheaper uniforms, second-hand offers. If you are someone that's really struggling at the moment with uniform costs, we would say speak to your school first. There are also uniform banks, and actually some local councils do offer support for the most vulnerable, and that's quite a postcode lottery across London as to who supports in that way. And then Asda and Buttle, we are supporting the most vulnerable. We're putting up another £125,000 to spend on school uniforms for those vulnerable children. And I also think that if individuals are watching and they feel like, I haven't got school uniforms, but I really want to help with this and I can afford to help, then do go to www.buttleuk.com/uniforms.
Well, for more information on how to donate, you can head to buttleuk.org. Right, time for a final break now, but when we come back, to celebrate Tower Bridge's inspiration to artists for over 100 years, one urban landscape artist has created works inspired by the views from the Blue Walkway. We'll be taking a look at the exhibition.
From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live. From breaking news to headline events, the latest trends and places to be.
You can now keep up to date on daily life in London across London Live's social platforms.
Start the day with an update on the travel and weather, and know what's on around the city and what's being seen by others.
With stories from London Live's team of reporters and your videos of the news moments that matter.
Minute by minute. That's London Live News on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram and more.
Find us at London Live.
Welcome back to the final part of London Live News. Now, a family home set up in London's Tate Modern Museum will be covered in colourful dots by the end of the summer. It's currently pristine, white and uniform, but not for long. The work is called The Obliteration Room, and it's by the Japanese artist Yayoi Kusama. It invites visitors to place stickers on any surface they like within the installation. Well, the concept is that families can come and leave their mark on this blank canvas. Let's take a look.
It's the biggest iteration of this project ever made anywhere in the world. It's an apartment-size installation, about the size of a tennis court, domestic apartment for a family with 2 or 3 kids, lots of toys, lots of modern furniture. It's all white, and over the course of a 5-week period we're inviting the general public to come in and use coloured stickers, specially designed by Yayoi Kusama, to turn it into a riot of colour.
Art and creativity has a very big impact on all areas of a child's development, from personal, social development to communication and language to physical development, and then all the other areas of science and maths, they all come into it. Because when they're engaged in an activity, you can implement, as an educator, you can also prompt that learning, whatever that learning is. So especially with the spots, we've had creativity on counting and exploring the colours, and then also science when we're mixing the colours and creating new colours.
Yayoi Kusama is one of those artists that is a people's artist. I mean, I almost categorise people's artist, artist. From very early on in her career, Yayoi Kusama spoke to the public. She was an amazing self-publicist in the 50s and 60s. She wanted to bring people into the centre of her world and to create experiences for the public that would replicate the experiences that have moved her. And that's why the work is always intensely emotional. It's joyous or it's tragic. You know, it tugs at your heart.
There we are. It'll be good to see how it looks in a few weeks, and it closes on the 29th of August, and you can make your mark until then at the Tate Modern. Now, to celebrate Tower Bridge's inspiration to many artists for 128 years, urban landscape artist Melissa Scott Miller has created works inspired by the views from the Blue Walkway. The final artwork from the A Bridge with a View exhibition is set to be sold in an auction to raise money for the local community. Let's take a look.
Well, I've been painting there for the last couple of months, and I've done one big panoramic view of looking right down the river, looking west. And then I did a smaller painting of the side with the tower and all the walkie-talkie and all the modern and old buildings together. And now I'm doing a third one on the other side of what used to be City Hall and the Shard sort of fit together in a way. Well, with my work, I paint from life, and I love London, and I love looking at nature and man-made things, and I just want to capture the light and the different textures that you see in London buildings, and I suppose ultimately to convey the feeling I get when I look at these views, and also just to, lose myself in creating them. I find that's what happens if I concentrate really hard. I've lived in London all my life, and I think my work is autobiographical, so it's always been based on what's around me and what's happening in my life. Like, I did a lot of paintings of schools and playgrounds when my children were young, and then when I had a dog I kept painting parks, and so I get influenced by what's going on and what I see around me. And I'd never actually painted, I had painted the river a couple of times, but I'd never really chosen it as my subject. But I've been painting a lot of paintings of the canal, the Regent's Canal. And so, it did seem like the next kind of thing to do, and, also quite an ambitious thing to take on. It's quite different in a way for me, because although I do paint a lot outside in the street, in parks and things, and I often get people coming up to me. But working on the walkway of Tower Bridge, I've had, thousands of people and school children coming up to me and looking at what I'm doing and asking questions. And it has been quite difficult in a way, but it's also been really lovely because I've had some mass encouragement, particularly from children. It's so lovely. Like, a lot of children have just wanted to stand and watch. And that's really, really nice. And people made really positive comments. But they also keep asking the same questions. And I'm used to really concentrating and going into my own world. And so it has been quite difficult. But at the same time, it's wonderful to feel so special. And I feel like I am giving a message to like these children and adults of, why not go and look out of the window and paint what you see. And, I think it's really a nice feeling.
There we go, lovely stuff, celebrating an iconic landmark. Now, let's take a final look at the weather for you. It's going to be a dry and cloudy evening tonight with temperatures of around 15 degrees overnight. A lovely and sunny morning ahead, taking us into Friday, where temperatures are looking to reach 27 degrees. Looking ahead to the weekend, on Saturday and Sunday, we should expect a little more cloud cover, but it's staying hot with temperatures around 26 to 27 degrees. Well, that's all from us this evening. For updates throughout the day, do head over to our social channels. You can find us in all the usual places at London Live. But from now, from all of us here, have a lovely evening, and I'll see you tomorrow at 6 o'clock.